The house was already burning when he realized she was still inside. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have time. He punched through a window with his bare hands. Glass, fire, blood. And he pulled her out. And afterward, sitting in a barn while everything she owned turned to ash, she asked him what he'd been thinking. He said, "I was thinking if you died in there, I'd have failed 2 people, Daniel and you, and I've failed enough people for 1 lifetime." That was the moment she knew. The butcher of Silver Creek was the best man she'd ever met. The lesson Margaret and Luke carry is one the West knew well. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's a man with burned hands choosing, again and again, to show up for someone who never asked him to be a hero. This channel is a home for stories that live in the bones. Like this video, if it stayed with you. Subscribe for more stories like this one. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. Thank you for being part of our community.
That courtroom was thick with the smell of cheap cigars and even cheaper justice. Margaret squeezed her hand so hard her knuckles were bone white, refusing to give those men the satisfaction of seeing her tremble. Judge Hawthorne never even met her eyes, staring at his papers like the law was ink, not the woman standing 3 feet in front of him. He cleared his throat and began, "Mrs. Callahan, the territorial statute of 1874 is perfectly clear. A woman cannot own more than 40 acres without a male guardian." Margaret's voice was steady when she replied, "I know the law, Judge." She had rehearsed this very moment in the dark, early hours of the morning, with her dead husband's dusty boots still standing by the door where he left them 6 months ago. "Then you understand," the judge said. "I understand my husband was the sheriff who died for this town. I understand this land was paid for with his courage and my own sweat. So yes, I understand the law. I just don't understand why it punishes a woman for building something." A heavy silence fell, the kind that always follows when a woman speaks her mind. Judge Hawthorne polished his glasses. "The law does not care about sentiment, Mrs. Callahan." From the back, a chair groaned. Victor Crowley, the wealthiest man in Red Hollow, made his move. When he shifted his weight, the whole town felt it. "Your Honor, if I might," Crowley said, his voice as slick as snake oil, "the Callahan place sits on 412 acres of the best grazing land around. Mrs. Callahan, bless her heart, has no help and no legal right to it. I have made her a generous offer." Margaret shot back, "You call 12 cents an acre for $3 land a fair offer? Mr. Crowley, where I come from, we call that stealing with a smile." A low rumble of talk moved through the room. Crowley's grin never wavered. "I also offered you a respectable job as my housekeeper." "You offered me a cage with pretty curtains," she said. Judge Hawthorne slammed his gavel. "Enough. Mrs. Callahan, you have 14 days to find a man to legally take over the property. If you fail, she will not need 14 days." The new voice sliced through the tension. Every single person turned to the open doorway. A man stood there filling the frame. He was not just tall, he was solid, like a part of the landscape. A low-brimmed hat shadowed a face that had not seen a razor in a while. But it was his eyes that quieted the whole room. They were not angry, just empty, like a well that had seen too many dry seasons. A whisper went through the crowd like a chill. Luke Mercer. They called him the Butcher. Crowley's smirk finally broke. Luke walked right down the center aisle, his worn boots making a slow, steady rhythm on the floorboards. He stopped before the judge, but did not bother to take off his hat. "Your Honor," he said, his voice all gravel and dust, "I am here to marry Mrs. Callahan." The room exploded. Margaret grabbed the railing to keep from falling. Luke spoke without looking at her. "I know her situation." Judge Hawthorne leaned in. "Mr. Mercer, You have a reputation. 3 men dead in Silver Creek. Bounties in 2 territories. The bounty was cleared, Luke stated flatly, placing a folded paper on the bench. It was a pardon from the governor. I was a scout for the government for 4 years. Every man I put down was armed and aiming at me, he added. Every last one. Crowley jumped to his feet. This is a farce. You cannot allow her to marry this killer. Luke's voice stayed low and even. The law says she needs a husband, not a saint. And it sure does not say she has to accept a thief either. His eyes flicked over to Crowley, and for the first time Margaret saw the powerful man turn pale. Judge Hawthorne set the pardon down. Well, Mrs. Callahan, he said, this is unusual, but his papers are in order. The choice is yours. Margaret looked at Luke Mercer. She saw the long scar on his jaw and the hard-worn hands that had likely done terrible things. He finally turned and looked right at her. Ma'am, he said softly, I am not asking you to trust me. I am just offering you a way to keep what belongs to you. Why? Was the only word she could manage. Why would you do this? For a split second she saw a flash of old pain in his eyes. Because your husband asked me to. Daniel sent me a letter before his last ride. He made me promise that if anything happened, I would see to it that you and the ranch were safe. The air went out of Margaret's lungs. This is nonsense, Crowley sputtered. A criminal and a widow. Margaret cut him off, her eyes locked on the judge. The court did not ask for your opinion, Mr. Crowley. Then she said the words that changed everything. I accept. 20 minutes later, they were married. No music, no flowers, just the judge's tired voice in a stuffy room. They both said, I do, like they were signing a deed. When it was all over, the judge suggested a kiss. Margaret said, a handshake will do just fine. Luke offered his rough, calloused hand, and she took it. Mrs. Mercer, the judge declared. It is Callahan, Margaret corrected him. The ranch keeps my name. No one dared to argue. Outside, the July sun was a hammer. They walked to her wagon with a good 3 feet of air between them. I will sleep in the barn, Luke said. She stopped and faced him. The bunkhouse has a clean cot. The barn is for livestock. He just gave a slight nod. Yes, ma'am. She climbed into the wagon and took the reins, not waiting for him. As she drove the 5 miles home, a single question burned in her mind. What kind of man keeps a promise to the dead? The silence between them for the next 3 days was as thick as mud. He did not talk, he just worked. From sunup to sundown, he mended fences and fixed what was broken, a silent stranger who was now her husband. He just started fixing things one by one. The fence post Crowley's men knocked over stood straight again. He cleared the silt from the irrigation ditch that had been clogged since Daniel passed. That crooked barn door finally hung right. He never asked, just did it. Margaret would come outside in the morning, and something broken would be whole again. On the 3rd day, she saw him at the well, his shirt off, hauling water. His back was a road map of scars, pale lines crisscrossing each other from an old whip. It was a history of violence. A small sound escaped her throat, and he spun around. It was instinct, not surprise. When his eyes met hers, she saw pure shame. The kind a man feels when his deepest wounds are seen. He reached for his shirt. Don't, she said, her voice soft. You don't have to hide from me. Those marks are not your shame. He pulled the shirt on anyway, buttoning it clear to his neck. With respect, ma'am, you don't know what they are. Then tell me. Hell? He just picked up the bucket and walked past her. Not yet, he said. On the 5th night, the heat was a fist clenched around the house. Margaret sat on the porch, watching the dark. Luke came around the house, walking the fence line like he did every night, checking for trouble. He stopped when he saw her. Ma'am? Didn't mean to bother you? You did not. Sit a spell. He sat on the far end of the steps, a good 4 feet away. My husband, Daniel. He never said your name, she said. Not one time in 9 years. He would not have. Why not? Luke took off his hat. Because I am the kind of man a good husband does not mention to his wife. I did things for the marshals that are not fit for polite company. Did you do them for Daniel? There was a long silence. I tracked a man once, he finally said. A man who killed a family near Laramie. Daniel could not cross the territory line, so he sent me. And you found him. I found him. And he did not make it back alive. She let the hot night air swallow his words. The men in Silver Creek, she said. The ones they call you a butcher for killing. They were running women over the border. 2 pulled their guns on me. The 3rd came at me with a knife. I did what I had to do. Should you have hesitated? He looked at her then, a real look, not one of his quick glances. No, ma'am, I should not have. Margaret gave a slow nod. Daniel chose you for a good reason. He knew what I would be facing. Victor Crowley is not going to give up just because I'm married again, is he? Luke put his hat back on. No, ma'am, he is not. So what is next? He will push. He will try to break you, break the ranch, break this marriage. He wants you to get desperate and sell. And if I refuse? Luke stood up, his eyes on the dark prairie. Then he will do something much worse. Margaret stood up too. Then I need to ask you something, Luke Mercer. When it gets worse, are you going to fight for this place? Or will you just disappear? He turned to face her, his gaze steady. I do not break my promises, ma'am. That is the one thing they got wrong about me. What did they get right? A long moment passed. That I am dangerous. He then stepped off the porch and vanished into the night. For the first time since Daniel's death, she felt a flicker of something that was not quite hope, but close to it. It was like being pulled from underwater just long enough to take one single breath. She went inside and locked the door from habit, not from fear. In the bunkhouse, the man they called a butcher laid in the dark, his hand over a letter in his coat pocket. It was from the dead sheriff. It said, "Look after Maggie. The wolves will come for her, and she will need someone who knows how to fight them." Luke folded the letter. The wolves were already here. They came on the 7th morning. Margaret found the dead calf in the south pasture. Its belly was cut open with a knife. It was a message. She did not cry. She just felt a cold hardness settle deep inside her. Luke was suddenly beside her. He knelt and touched the cut. "A knife," he said. "Happened between midnight and 3 this morning." "How can you be so sure?" "The blood is dry, but it is not black yet," he said, wiping his hand on his pants. "This was not a coyote. I know what it was not." He looked at her and saw she was not breaking. "There will be more," he said. "I know that too. I will ride the perimeter every night until the coward who did this is found." Luke gave a single nod. "Yes, ma'am." By noon, she had found 2 more dead calves, each one left where she would be the first to see it. This was not about cattle. It was about making her feel alone. She was at the kitchen sink when she heard 2 riders coming up the road. She grabbed Daniel's shotgun from over the door and walked outside. The riders stopped. One was Tom Avery, Crowley's foreman. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, tipping his hat with a smile that felt like an insult. "It is Callahan," Margaret said flatly. "What is your business? Mr. Crowley heard about your troubles with your cattle. He sends his sympathies." "Predators do not use knives, Tom." "Well, now, that is a mighty serious thing to say without any proof. I have got 3 dead calves and a man on my porch who works for the only person who wants my land. That is all the proof I need." Tom leaned on his saddle horn. "Mr. Crowley's offer of 15 cents an acre still stands. He thinks I am getting desperate, aren't you?" Margaret raised the shotgun just enough. "You are on my property, Tom. Daniel taught me how to shoot when I was 14. Now you can deliver your message, but you will not call me desperate on my own land." Tom's smile vanished. "Where is your new husband, Mrs. Mercer, the famous butcher?" "That is none of your concern." Seems to me it should be. A woman out. Here alone, with no help and no law. State your business or get off my land. Tom gathered his reins. 15 cents. You have until the end of the month. He turned his horse, then paused. And ma'am, you might want to check your water. In this heat, a well can turn bad mighty quick. Then they rode away. Margaret stood on that porch until they were just a cloud of dust. She leaned the shotgun against the railing and let her hands shake for 10 seconds. Then she stopped them. Luke appeared from behind the barn. He had been there the whole time, close enough to hear, but far enough to let her handle it. You heard? She asked. Every word. He threatened our water. I know. If they foul that well, we are finished, Luke. The cattle, the garden, everything. We would have to haul water 8 miles from Bitter Creek. They will not poison it. And how do you know that? Because I will be watching. She looked at him hard. You are just one man. You cannot watch the fences, the cattle, the well, and everything else. I have been one man my entire life. I can manage. This is not about managing. This is a war. No, he said, shaking his head. This is just a rich man trying to squeeze a woman he thinks is all by herself. It is not war. It is bullying. And bullies always have a weakness. What is that? They never expect you to hit back. I am not asking you to kill anyone for me. I am not offering to. Then what are you offering? He took a step closer, just enough for her to see the scar that pulled at his jaw when he spoke. I am offering to be the reason Crowley starts sleeping with one eye open. Right now, he thinks I am just a story. He is testing to see if that story is true. I plan to show him it is, without violence and without starting a thing. But I need you to understand, ma'am. He met her gaze. If they come in the night with fire or with weapons, I will not stand by. I will not hold back, and I will not be sorry for what happens. Margaret felt her heart pound in her throat. Daniel would not have wanted you to kill for me. Daniel asked me to protect you. He never said how. She looked away toward the empty prairie and the endless hot sky. Fine, she said, but you answer to me. Not to whatever demons are eating at you from the inside. You answer to me. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. Yes, ma'am. He turned and walked to the barn. Margaret watched him, thinking of how Daniel used to say the law was a fence to keep the wolves out. She did not believe that anymore. The wolves were wearing badges and carrying land deeds, and the fence Daniel built was being torn down piece by piece. The next morning, Luke was gone before the sun came up. His cot in the bunkhouse was empty, the blanket folded perfectly. He returned at noon, his horse covered in sweat. He walked right up to her. Crowley filed a petition in Cheyenne, he said. He is challenging our marriage. Margaret felt her stomach drop. On what grounds? He is using my criminal history. He argues the governor's pardon cleared the sentence, but not the record. He says the court cannot honor a marriage to a man who is morally unfit. Morally unfit? That is a bold claim from a man who steals land for a living. It does not matter if it is bold. It only matters if it is legal. If the court agrees, the marriage will be annulled. You will lose your legal claim, the land goes back to the territory, and Crowley buys it for next to nothing. That is his plan. Margaret felt a cold dread spread through her. How long do we have? A petition usually takes 60 days. It could be faster if Crowley has a friend on the bench in Cheyenne. He has friends everywhere. Then we have less than 60 days. She paced back and forth. What are we going to do? We make the marriage seem real. She stopped and stared at him. Not like that, he said quickly, a faint blush rising on his face. I mean, we make it public. We go into town, we buy supplies together. We let folks see us acting like a married couple. If the town believes the marriage is genuine, his petition looks weak. The town hates you. The town is afraid of me, he corrected. That is different. Is it? Hate comes from knowing someone. Fear just needs a rumor. So we give them a new story. We change the fear. You want me to stroll through Red Hollow holding hands with the butcher of Silver Creek? I want you to keep your land, ma'am. If holding hands is what it takes, I will manage. A small laugh caught in her throat. He saw it. and for a moment the hardness in his eyes softened. "Fine," she said. "Tomorrow we go to town." "We go." "Yes, ma'am." "And Luke?" "Ma'am, if anyone calls you a butcher, you let me handle them." He looked at her, curious. "Why?" "Because if I am going to be Margaret Mercer in public, then they will answer to me, not your fists." He looked at her for a long moment. Then the corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Yes, ma'am," he said. The town was even worse than she imagined. They rode in side by side, and every person on Main Street turned to stare. The whispers began before they even reached the general store. "Look at him. She really brought him with her. Poor Margaret. Her husband must be turning in his grave." She climbed down from the wagon, held her head high, and walked into Patterson's general store as if she owned it. Luke followed, taking off his hat as he entered. She noticed the small gesture. Old Henry Patterson behind the counter looked pale when he saw Luke. "Mrs. Callahan, I mean, Mrs. Mercer," he stammered. "Margaret is just fine, Henry. I need flour, sugar, salt, and some of that blue cotton fabric. And whatever Mr. Mercer needs." Henry's eyes shot toward Luke, who stood by the door, quiet and still. "Just some nails," Luke said. 10 penny, 2 pounds. Henry nodded, his hands shaking as he weighed the nails. From the back of the store, a sharp voice cut through the silence. "Well, well, the widow and her hired killer." Margaret turned to face Rose Whitfield, the pastor's wife and the town's chief gossip. "Mrs. Whitfield," Margaret said calmly, "it is nice to see you." "Is it?" "Because it looks to me like you have lost your senses, Margaret. Marrying that man." Luke did not react. "He is more civilized than anyone in this town who watched my cattle get killed and did nothing," Margaret said. Rose's face grew tight. "We did not. 3 of my calves were slaughtered on my land, Rose. Knifed. And not a single person in this town asked if I was all right. Not the pastor, not the sheriff, and not you." The store was dead silent. "Your husband was a good man," Rose said. "The best sheriff we ever had. And you replaced him with that." Margaret took one step forward. Her voice was low and steady. "Daniel died protecting this town. And the moment he was gone, Victor Crowley came for my land. Not one of you stood up for me, so do not you dare lecture me on my choices. I made the only choice you all left me." "I will pray for you, Margaret," Rose said finally. "Pray for yourself, Rose. You are the one who has to live with doing nothing." Margaret paid for her things and walked out. Luke followed, carrying the heavy flour sack like it was nothing. At the wagon, he loaded their supplies. "You did not need me in there," he said. "No, I suppose I do not need you for a lot of things. Then why did you bring me?" Margaret took the reins and looked ahead. "Because you are my husband," she said. "And in this town, that means something, whether they like it or not." The wagon moved forward, and for a long time neither of them spoke. But the silence felt different now, less like a wall and more like a window you could almost see through. They were halfway home when Luke said, "My commanding officer was named Colonel Briggs." Margaret kept model. She kept her eyes forward. "He said the order came down to clear a settlement, claiming Apache women and children were harboring fighters." Luke's voice was hollow, like a man recalling a bad dream. "I refused. I told him I did not sign up to kill kids. For that, he had me stripped and whipped before the whole company. 30 lashes. I passed out at 22 and woke up tied to a wagon wheel." Margaret's hands clenched the reins. "Another unit cleared it. I heard the gunfire. I could not stop it." "That is not on you," she said. "Maybe not, but it is my burden." Silence settled between them. "Is that why you kill?" Her question was direct. "No, ma'am. I kill because some men leave you no other way, but every time I hear those shots. And I wonder if I am any different from them." "You are." "How do you know?" "Because they never lost a night's sleep over it. You have not slept right since." He looked at her, and she felt the heat of his stare. "You remind me of him," Luke said, soft-like. "Who?" "Daniel. He had a way of seeing things in folks they could not see themselves." Her eyes burned, but she refused to let a tear fall. He saw something in you, a man who was looking for a reason. Luke was silent for a good while. Now I have one. They rode the rest of the way to the ranch in silence. She pulled the wagon to a stop, and as Luke unloaded their things, they moved around each other like two people forced into a dance they did not know. That night, sleep would not come. Margaret sat on the porch in the heat. When Luke came by on his walk, he just sat down without a word a few feet away. "Luke." "Ma'am." "My name is Margaret." He said her name, Margaret, real careful, like it was fragile. Something inside her stirred, a feeling she had not known in ages. "Thank you," she said, "for what you did with Rose." She was not wrong about the killing, but she was dead wrong about me. She was wrong about the man you are. There is a big difference between what a man does and what he is. He took off his hat, holding it in both hands like an anchor. "Daniel used to say that," he murmured. "Then it is about time you believed it." He looked at her, and in the dark she saw something raw in his face. He was afraid of her, not of her strength, but of her power to save him. Because being saved means changing, and he only knew how to be one kind of man. "Good night, Margaret." "Good night, Luke." He vanished into the night, and she wondered what Daniel had truly sent her. Not a killer, but something far more dangerous. A man she might trust. In the bunkhouse, Luke sat on his cot. He could still hear her saying his name, not like a warning, but like something she meant to keep. He pulled out the letter one more time, reading by moonlight. "Look after Maggie." "I am trying, Daniel," he whispered. "Lord help me, I am trying." He put the letter away. Miles away in a grand house, Victor Crowley read a report from his men. "The marriage looks real. Mercer is there, and he is armed. The widow is not breaking." Crowley tossed the report into the fireplace. He then took his pen and wrote a simple two-word order: "Burn it." The smell woke Margaret first. She sat bolt upright, her lungs choked with thick, awful smoke. For a second, she was lost. Then her throat tightened and her eyes stung. An orange glow under the door told her the whole terrible story. Fire. The floorboards were already hot under her feet as she scrambled for a robe. When she grabbed the doorknob, the metal seared her hand. The pain sliced through the hazy smoke in her mind. "Luke!" she screamed. But the only answer was the deep, hungry roar of the blaze consuming her home. The porch. She dropped to the floor and crawled toward the back, blinded by the black smoke. But she knew every inch of this house, a place that held her past and her burning future. The back door was stuck fast. She slammed her shoulder into it 3 times, but it would not give. The heat at her back was growing stronger, pushing her toward a door that refused to open. Luke. Suddenly, glass shattered. Someone was breaking the kitchen window from the outside. Large, bloody hands reached through the broken pane. Then Luke's voice cut through the chaos. "Margaret, take my hands." She could not see him, only feel his powerful grip lock onto her wrists. He pulled her toward the window. "I will not fit. Tuck your arms, I got you." She did as he said. He pulled. Sharp glass tore at her skin, but she was moving. She was being pulled out into the open air. The air turned smoky, but she could still breathe. Then the ground was rushing up to meet her as Luke threw his body over hers. Behind them, the old house wasn't just burning, it was screaming. That ain't just a fancy word for it. The timber shrieked as it split, and the roof came down with a roar like a giant snapping a piano in two. Margaret pushed her face into the cool dirt, feeling Luke's weight, and thought, "It's all gone. Everything Daniel built. Everything I tried to keep." He pulled her to her feet. His shirt was burned clean off his shoulders, and his arms were a mess of blisters. "Can you stand up?" he asked. "Yes." "Can you walk?" "Yes." "Then start walking, away from the fire." She did. He stayed right with her, a hand steady on her back. It was the first time he'd touched her since they shook hands at the courthouse, and she couldn't bring herself to pull away. His hand was the only solid thing left in a world that was turning to ash. They stopped a ways off and turned to look. The Callahan ranch house was just a pillar of fire against the dark sky. Margaret watched 9 years of marriage, and every picture she owned of Daniel just turn to light and then vanish. She wanted to cry, Lord knows she did, but something inside her just locked up tight. Crowley. Luke just nodded. Kerosene. I could smell it under the smoke. He poured it all along the porch, trying to box you in. He meant to kill me. No, he meant to scare you. If he wanted you dead, he'd have blocked the windows too. So this is what he calls scaring someone. This is what a desperate man does. He's running out of time. Margaret's hand started shaking, not with fear, but with a pure, hot rage that felt like it had been settling in her bones since the day Daniel died. I want to see him, she said, her voice low. I want to look Victor Crowley right in the eye. Not tonight, Margaret. Not like this. Don't you tell me no. Luke stepped right in front of her, closer than he'd ever been. She could feel the heat from his burns and smell the smoke in his hair. The fire was reflected in his eyes like it had always been there and was just now getting lit from the outside. You listen to me, he said, his voice rough and shaking with something she'd never heard before. It was the sound of the man who had just pulled a woman from a fire and was fighting himself not to do something that couldn't be taken back. If I go into town tonight, I will kill him. I know that like I know my own name. And if I do, everything we've been building falls apart. The land, your good name, all of it. He burned my house, I know. He burned everything of Daniel's, the only picture I had from my wedding day. I know. And you're telling me to wait? I'm telling you the man who set this fire is hoping I'll ride into town with a gun. He wants the butcher of Silver Creek to show up. He wants me to prove all their stories right. Luke's jaw was set like stone. And I will not give him that satisfaction, not tonight, not ever. Margaret just stared at him, the fire crackling behind them. Then what do? We made it through the night. Tomorrow, we start fighting smart. They moved to the barn. Luke laid out some horse blankets in the hay. Margaret sat down and hugged her knees, just staring at the dark, while Luke saw to his burns with water from the trough. She watched him peel the burned cloth from his arms without even a wince. He moved like a man who'd patched himself up so many times it was second nature. Let me see your hands, she said. I'm fine. Let me see 'em, Luke. He paused, then held them out to her. The cuts from the glass were deep. You need stitches for this. I've had worse. That's not the point. She tore a strip from a clean blanket, wet it, and started cleaning the wounds. She was so gentle about it, he looked plumb confused, like he'd never been touched with care before. You came through a burning window for me, she said quietly. Yes, ma'am. Margaret, why didn't you use the door? Tried. The whole front porch was gone, just a wall of fire. The kitchen window was the only way in that wasn't already an inferno. You punched right through the glass, with your bare hands. Didn't have time to go looking for a rock. She finished wrapping his right hand and started on his left. You could have died. Wasn't thinking on that. What were you thinking about? He was quiet for a second. I was thinking that if you died in there, I'd have failed 2 people, Daniel and you, and I've failed enough folks for 1 lifetime. She tied off the last bandage but didn't let go of his hand. You didn't fail, she said. I'm still here. Your house is gone. A house is just wood and nails. I'm flesh and blood, and I'm still here. He looked down at their hands, his big and wrapped in bloody cloth, hers small and smudged with soot. Margaret, don't you dare say you're sorry. He closed his mouth. Say something else, she said. Say what you're really feeling. Not what you think a man like you is supposed to feel. What do you feel right now? He pulled his hand back and pressed his fist to his knees. She saw his shoulders heave once, then twice, and she knew she was watching a man take down a wall he'd spent 34 years building. I'm scared, he said, the word coming out broken. Not of Crowley. Not of the fire. I'm scared I'm going to do something that makes you look at me the way everyone else in this town does. Like I'm a monster." His voice cracked. "I'm scared you'll wake up one day and see what I really am, and wish you'd taken Crowley's deal instead. I've killed 11 men, Margaret, 11. Some of them had it coming, some maybe not. And I carry every one of them, every single day, like a sack of rocks on my chest. I can't put 'em down because if I do, I have to admit I'm the kind of man who can carry 'em in the first place." She didn't say a word. She just let his confession hang in the air. Then she moved, closing the careful distance they'd always kept between them. She sat right beside him, shoulder to shoulder. She could feel the heat coming off him, not from the fire, but from inside him. "I'm not ever going to look at you like that," she said. "You don't know that. I know a monster doesn't run into a burning building for someone else. A monster doesn't sit in a barn with bloody hands and tell a woman he's scared." She turned to face him fully. "You are not what they call you, Luke Mercer. You are what you choose to be. And tonight you chose me." He looked at her, and she kissed him. It wasn't a soft kiss. It was the kind of kiss a woman gives a man when the whole world has gone up in flames and he's the only solid thing left to hold on to. She kissed him when she had nothing left, pouring all of her fiery, unbroken spirit into it. For a heartbeat, he went still, and Margaret felt a cold dread, thinking she had read everything wrong. But then he kissed her back. His bandaged hands gently held her face, not with force, but with the steady care of a man who has finally found something precious. In that moment, the wall between them vanished like smoke. She pulled away, resting her forehead on his. "I did not plan that," she whispered. "I know," he said, "and I am not sorry." She looked him square in the eye. "I need you tomorrow. The real you, not the butcher the world sees." He asked what was happening tomorrow. "Tomorrow," she said, "we go to war." He searched her eyes, and a decision settled in his face. "Together," he said, and nodded once, a man sealing his fate. They sat in the barn and watched the house burn to embers. He put a clumsy arm around her shoulder, a gesture he seemed to be remembering after a long time. As the fire died, she heard him whisper, "I do not deserve this." She just leaned in closer and said, "Neither did I. But here we are." Dawn broke, angry and red. Margaret stood before the ruins and took stock of what was left. She still had the barn, 60 head of cattle, and a husband with bloody hands and a heart bigger than his reputation. And she had rage, plenty of it. Luke was already by the horses, holding not a gun but papers, land surveys and tax records. "Where did you get these?" she asked. He explained they were from the territorial office. Victor Crowley's name was on 12 land purchases in the last 3 years, and every single one came after a suspicious fire or poisoned well. The ranchers sold cheap, and Crowley bought. Luke admitted he had been gathering this proof for a while, ever since Daniel sent him a second letter he had not told her about. "A second letter?" she asked. Luke handed her a worn envelope. Margaret recognized Daniel's handwriting right away, the way his letters slanted and the periods were pressed too hard. The note was a warning. Crowley was dirty, and the local judge was on his payroll. If anything happened to Daniel, the proof was in a floor safe under the kitchen, with the combination being her birthday. "Don't let him take the land," it read. "Don't let him take her." Margaret's hands trembled. "The kitchen," she said, looking at the smoldering wreckage. "An iron safe might have survived the fire," Luke said. She was already moving, kicking through hot timber. "Boots first," Luke warned, bringing them from the barn. They dug through inches of ash and found it. Margaret knelt and dialed her birthday, March 17th, 1952. The lock clicked. Inside was a leather folder, singed but whole. It held forged land deeds and bank statements showing payments from Crowley to the judge. There was also a sworn statement from a ranch hand who saw Crowley's men set a fire a year and a half ago. "Daniel knew," Margaret whispered. He was building a case. Luke's jaw was tight. And someone made sure he never finished it. She looked up, confused. Your husband was supposedly shot by a drifter who was never found, Luke said slowly. I am saying that Victor Crowley had every reason to want Daniel Callahan gone. The truth hit her like a physical blow. She clutched the folder to her chest, her eyes burning not from smoke, but from a rage that had been building for 6 months. Then we end this, she declared. Today, we ride into Red Hollow and show these papers to everyone. We will burn Victor Crowley to the ground. Not the town, Luke corrected her. The territorial marshal. We have to go over Crowley's head. The marshal's office was in Cheyenne, a 3-day ride. Luke had a better idea. A telegraph office in Hayden, 20 miles east, a town Crowley did not control. Margaret looked at this broken man who stood in the ashes of her life, offering her a way forward that did not rely on bullets. You were ready for this, she realized. I promised Daniel I would protect you, he said simply. I keep my promises. They saddled the horses. Margaret changed into a pair of Daniel's old work trousers she found hanging in the barn. She tucked the precious folder inside her shirt. Luke checked his revolver. I thought you said no bullets, she remarked. I said I would not start the fight, he replied. I did not say I would not finish it. They rode east, hard and fast, across the open prairie with nowhere to hide. It was not long before someone came looking for them. Margaret heard the hoofbeats first. 3 riders closing in fast, kicking up a cloud of dust. Crowley's men, Luke said, his voice calm. What do we do? He did not speed up or slow down. He just said, trust me. The first shot cracked past her ear, so close she felt its heat. The second kicked up dirt just a few feet away. Stay low on your horse, Luke yelled, and do not stop. Margaret pressed herself against her horse's neck, the folder with Daniel's evidence a hard rectangle against her ribs. Luke drew his revolver but did not aim. They are shooting wide, he explained. They want to stop us, not kill us. If they stop shooting wide, I stop being patient. A third shot ripped through the back of Margaret's saddle, and the impact jarred her to the bone. That one was not a warning. In one smooth motion, Luke turned and fired a single shot. The lead rider's hat flew from his head, a message sent and received. The 3 men pulled their horses to a sudden halt. Luke holstered his weapon. Ride now, he commanded, while they are deciding what to do. They rode until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely, and the town of Hayden appeared on the horizon. When they finally stopped behind the telegraph office, Margaret's legs gave out from under her. Luke caught her and held her steady. That shot that hit my saddle, she said, her voice shaking. That was not wide. No, he said. They could have killed you. His hand rested on his belt near the folder she had given him. They will not get a second chance. Let's send that wire, she said. The telegraph operator in town was a skinny fella named Cecil. He looked at Luke like a rabbit eyeballing a hawk. Need to send a priority message to the U.S. Marshal's office in Cheyenne, Margaret said, her voice steady. Cecil glanced at Luke again. That's a government line, ma'am. Costs double. Then you can charge me double. Margaret laid out the message while Cecil's key started clicking. She kept it short and to the point, just like Daniel had taught her. Marshal Tommel Beck, stop. Have evidence of land fraud, arson, and corruption in Red Hollow, Wyoming, stop. Suspect is Victor Crowley, stop. Have documents secured, stop. Request an immediate federal investigation, stop. Signed, Margaret Callahan Mercer, widow of Sheriff Daniel Callahan, stop. Cecil's hand froze on that last part. You're Daniel Callahan's widow? I am. I knew Daniel. A good, honest man. Cecil looked at the words on the paper. This is about Crowley, ain't it? It is. The operator was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled open a drawer and took out a second form. He started copying her message, but this time he didn't mark it for billing. What are you up to? Luke asked. Seal did not look up from the telegraph key. I am sending a second copy to the federal office in Denver. just in case the wire to Cheyenne gets lost. Her fingers tapped out the message with a quick, steady rhythm. Everybody knew Crowley had folks listening in Cheyenne. But Denver was a different story. Margaret felt a wave of gratitude so strong it almost buckled her knees. She had been fighting all alone for so long. "Thank you, Seal." The operator just shook his head. "Do not thank me until they slap the cuffs on that son of a gun. Pardon me, ma'am." "I have heard much worse today," she replied. Seal handed her the receipt. "Cheyenne usually takes 48 hours. Denver might be quicker." Luke spoke up. "We do not have 48 hours." Seal's advice was simple. "Then find a safe place to lay low. If Crowley finds out about this message, he will not be aiming for the sky next time." Margaret tucked the receipt away. "We are heading back to Red Hollow." Luke stared at her like she had lost her mind. "That is the last place you should be." She stood her ground. "My land is there. My cattle are there. Everything that was not turned to ash last night is there. I am not going to hide while that man finishes the job. I am going back, with or without you." He looked at her for a long moment, then settled his hat on his head. "I am with you." They rode back under the brutal July sun, a heat that felt like it was cooking you from the inside out. Margaret's lips were split, her burned hand ached, and a cut on her hip bled through her trousers, but she never once slowed down. Luke rode beside her, scanning the horizon. "They will find out about the telegram," she said. "Someone in town will talk." Luke just nodded. "So Crowley will come for us, but this time it will be on our land, on our terms." "What is left of it, you mean?" she asked. "The barn is standing," he said. "The well is good, and the cattle are alive. Most important, you are alive." He saw her almost smile, a flicker of something that did not quite reach her eyes. But it was enough. As they rode into Red Hollow at sunset, the town felt different. Folks were watching them from behind curtains and in shadowed doorways. The air was thick with a new kind of fear, not of them, but of what was coming. Old Henry Patterson gave a short, quiet nod from his storefront, a man picking his side without saying a word. Dr. Whitaker was waiting outside his office. He took one look at Margaret's burns and bloody clothes. "Mrs. Callahan, you need a doctor." "I need a lot of things, Doc," she said. "Justice is first. Water is second." "I will take the water now." The doctor brought 2 canteens. After they drank, he spoke quietly. "I rode out to your place. That fire was no accident." "Everyone knows who did it," Margaret said. "The real question is, who is willing to say it?" She looked him straight in the eye. "Are you?" The old doctor, a man who had stayed neutral his whole life, rubbed his jaw. "Daniel was my friend," he said at last. "I have been a coward, Margaret. I looked the other way when Crowley ran folks off their land, but he tried to murder you. That makes it my fight now." The doctor then turned to Luke. "And Mr. Mercer, I owe you an apology. I believed all those stories about you." Luke just shrugged. "Most of them are probably true." Margaret spoke up. "The one about you being a monster is not. Monsters do not run into burning buildings to save people." She saw Luke swallow hard, like he was clearing a knot from his throat. News travels fast in a small town. That night, people started showing up at the barn, which was the only thing Margaret had left. They came one by one, like folks seeking shelter in a storm. There was a widow Crowley had cheated and a rancher whose water had been stolen. Then, to her surprise, Rose Whitfield, the pastor's wife, walked in with her head held low. All her old certainty was gone, replaced by a deep shame. "I came to say I am sorry," Rose said, her voice trembling. "I called your husband names while the real villain was buying my silence with $600 for the church." She was crying now. "I cared more about a building than my neighbor." Margaret took her hands. "Then help me now. Be a witness. When the marshal gets here, tell him everything. Tell him about the money and the threats you overheard." But those conversations were private, Rose whispered. Margaret's voice was firm. He burned my house with me inside it. Nothing is private anymore. Rose looked like a woman taking a terrifying leap of faith, and then she nodded. I will testify. All through the night, more people came. It was not a flood, just a trickle. But a trickle is how a river begins. By morning, they had a stack of sworn statements and the doctor's report on Margaret's injuries. Luke put all the papers in order. He knew the most powerful weapon was not a pistol, but a piece of paper with the right truth written on it. Watching him, Margaret felt a deep sense of pride, seeing him become the man he was always meant to be. Luke, she asked quietly, after this is all done, what about us? He stopped his work and turned to her. For the first time, she saw a flicker of hope in his eyes, small and new. I want to stay, he said softly, if you will have me. Not because of any law or letter, because of you. You saw the worst of me, and you did not run away. His voice was low and serious. Because you kissed me when everything was falling apart, and you tasted like smoke and fury and home. Tears filled Margaret's eyes, and for the first time she let them fall. I choose you, Luke, because you ran into that fire for me, because you are a good man who is afraid of taking up too much room, and I need you to stop being so far away. In 3 long strides, he was in front of her, holding her face in his hands. I will rebuild the house, he whispered. Our house. She smiled through her tears. Our house. He kissed her then, not with fire, but with a gentle promise to stay and prove he was the man she saw. On the 3rd day, the marshal arrived. Thomas Beck and 4 deputies rode down Main Street with a federal warrant in hand. The sound of their horses was the only noise in a town that had gone completely silent. Every door was shut, every curtain was drawn. Red Hollow held its breath, waiting for justice. He dismounted before the scorched remains of the ranch. Mrs. Mercer. Mrs. Callahan, she corrected. The land carries my first husband's name. Marshal Beck nodded. Ma'am, I received your wire, another from Denver, and 6 statements from a determined Mr. Cecil Watts. Margaret almost smiled, thinking of the quiet man's courage. I have proof, she said, handing him Daniel's file. My husband compiled this. It details land fraud, bribery, and arson. Her voice hitched. I believe Victor Crowley ordered his murder. Beck read through the pages, his jaw tightening. This is solid. Your husband was a good lawman. I have 7 sworn statements, the doctor's report on my burns, and other witnesses. Beck closed the folder and faced Luke. You are Luke Mercer? Yes, sir. The butcher of Silver Creek. Luke did not blink. I know what they call you. I also know about the governor's pardon, and I know that 3 of the men you killed back in Silver Creek were on a federal wanted list for trafficking. Beck offered his hand. You did us marshals a favor, Mr. Mercer. Unofficial, but noted. Luke shook his hand, saying nothing. But Margaret saw his shoulders ease down just a little, like a heavy burden had been acknowledged. Beck turned to his men. Ride to Crowley's ranch, serve the warrant. But they did not have to go far. An hour later, Victor Crowley rode into town all alone, a man who had run out of allies. He dismounted on Main Street. This is a mistake, he told the marshal. This woman is a grief-stricken widow, manipulated by a known killer. Mr. Crowley, Beck said, you are under arrest for fraud, arson, bribery, and conspiracy to commit murder. Murder is absurd. We got Judge Hawthorne's financial records this morning. He is cooperating now. He named you as the one behind Sheriff Callahan's death. The street went dead quiet. Margaret felt the ground drop out from under her. A thing she had suspected all along was now a cold, hard fact. Victor Crowley had her husband murdered. She stood on the same street Daniel had walked as sheriff, and faced the man who took him away. "You killed him," she said, her voice steady. "He was in the way," Crowley replied, and the casual way he said it was the cruelest blow of all. "He was a man," she said. "He was my husband. He was the best man in this whole town, and you killed him because he was in your way. That railroad is worth nothing compared to a man's life. You will spend the rest of your days learning that." Crowley's hand started to move toward his coat. "Do not," Luke said. The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a bullet. Crowley's hand froze. "I would not do that," Luke said. "Not today. Not in front of her." Crowley looked at Luke, at the scars, at the man who held the memory of 11 dead men inside him. "You are a killer," Crowley sneered. "I was." Beck's deputies cuffed Crowley and hauled him onto a horse. As they led him away, he turned to Margaret, his voice full of venom. "Your husband was a fool, and you married another one." But Margaret stood her ground. Her voice was steady, forged in 6 months of grief. "My husband was a hero, and the man I married is the bravest in this territory. You will not speak of them again." After Crowley was gone, the street stayed quiet for a long beat. Then, like a slow thaw, the town came back to life. Doors opened. Folks stepped out, tipping their hats. Old Henry Patterson crossed the street just to shake Luke's hand. Margaret did not feel victory. She felt a deep, quiet justice, the kind that honors what was lost. It was a promise that Daniel's life mattered. She reached for Luke's hand, and he held it tight. For the first time in a long while, the town of Red Hollow did not look away. Margaret did not sleep that night. But it was not fear or sorrow keeping her awake. It was something new stirring inside her, like a seed pushing toward the sun. She sat in the barn on a hay bale, holding Daniel's case file. Inside the cover, she finally saw a note she had been too busy surviving to notice. "Maggie," he had written, "I am gone, and I am sorry. I should have told you how dangerous it was. I thought I could handle it alone, but I was wrong. You were always the stronger one." She pressed the note to her lips. "I proved it," she whispered to the shadows. "I hope you saw." Luke found her there at dawn, hat in his hands. "Marshal Beck wants us at the town hall," he said. "Now." It's a hard thing to watch a good woman get pushed to the brink by folks who ought to know better. Margaret Callahan stood up, brushing hay from her dead husband's trousers. She was still wearing his clothes, a ghost of him against her skin. It was all she had left of a man who'd given her everything, only to be torn away by greed. This is a story about how one woman's courage can shame a whole town into doing what's right. It reminds us that you have to stand up, even when your knees are shaking. As she and Luke rode into town, there were no more whispers or stares. Instead, folks nodded. A young mother even called out, "Morning, Mrs. Callahan. God bless you." The town hall was packed tight. Every rancher, shopkeeper, and family from Red Hollow was there, breathing in the smell of dust, sweat, and a heavy, unspoken shame. It was the kind of shame that hangs over a place that watched a woman suffer and did absolutely nothing. Marshal Beck stood at the front next to a fella in a clean city suit. Margaret took a seat in the front row, with Luke standing right behind her like a wall of solid rock. Beck got straight to it. Victor Crowley had sung like a canary. He confessed to every dirty land deal, every fire, every bribe, and— the marshal's voice dropped low— to hiring a man named Jonas Pike to murder Sheriff Daniel Callahan. A few folks gasped, but Margaret just sat there, still as a stone. She'd already cried all her tears over this. "Jonas Pike," she said, her voice steady. "Where is he?" Beck looked her in the eye. "Dead. Killed in a bar fight in Deadwood 4 months ago. So no one would truly answer for Daniel's death." "Crowley will spend the rest of his life in a federal prison," Beck said, knowing it was cold comfort. "No, it's not the same," Margaret replied. Justice, she'd learned, wasn't a feast. It was just enough water to keep you from dying of thirst. The man in the suit, a land commissioner named Arthur Wynne, stepped forward. "Mrs. Callahan," he began, "the territorial government has looked into all of Crowley's crooked dealings. 14 properties were stolen. All of them are being returned to their rightful owners." He paused. "You're saying I get my land back?" Margaret asked, hardly daring to breathe. "Ma'am," Wynne said gently, "the land was always yours." The law just took a while to catch up. Something inside her finally broke open. She felt Luke's hand come to rest on her shoulder, a quiet question, and she covered it with her own. "There's more," Wynne said. "That guardianship law that forced you to marry to keep your property? Your case has shown how wrong it is, and it's being reviewed." "Reviewed isn't repealed," Margaret said, standing up to face the whole room. "A start would have been one of you standing up 6 months ago. A start would have been someone asking if I needed help instead of watching me burn." The room was dead silent. "I don't blame y'all," she went on. "Crowley made cowards of us all. I was too proud to ask for help, and you were too scared to offer it. A good man died because none of us were brave enough. But I'm asking now," she said, her voice filling the hall. "Not for me. For every widow in this territory who's one dead husband away from losing everything. This law needs to be changed, and I'm going to be the one to change it." And then a woman named Rose Whitfield stood up. Then another and another. Soon 30 people were on their feet. A silent promise in a room that had been quiet for too long. Margaret finally understood what Daniel had always believed, that people are good, and that the law is only as strong as the folks willing to fight for it. The marshal tipped his hat. "Your husband would be proud." "I know," Margaret said. "He always was." Outside, Luke waited by the wagon, patient as ever. When she walked over, she leaned against it beside him. "You know what Daniel would say right now?" she asked. "He'd say, 'Maggie, you just gave a speech to half the town in your husband's old breeches. You might want to buy a dress.'" And Luke laughed. It wasn't a chuckle. It was a real, honest-to-goodness laugh that seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. It changed his whole face, making him look younger, like a man who hadn't seen so much sorrow. "That's the first time I've heard you do that," she said softly. "It's the first time in a long time," he admitted. "Too long," she said, nudging him with her shoulder. "Well, I'm making it my mission to fix that." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence now, filled with trust. The barn was still standing, and by the fence someone had left a bundle. Inside was bread, preserves, and a quilt with a note. "From your neighbors. We should have done this months ago." Margaret let just 2 tears fall before carrying the gifts inside. Luke was already at it. He'd pulled old lumber from the hay shed and was measuring and cutting. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Starting the house." "Luke, we don't have enough for a whole house." "We've got enough for a floor," he said, not looking up. "And a floor is a start." She watched him work, his burned hands steady on the saw, building their future one piece at a time. At Daniel's grave, marked by a cross she had carved, Margaret knelt and laid a hand on the earth. "It is over, Daniel. Crowley is done, and your fight is finished." She took a deep breath. "I need to tell you about Luke. You were right to trust him. He is a good man, better than he knows." Her voice cracked, but she pushed on. "And I love him. Not like I loved you. Nothing will ever be that. But it is real and honest, and I think you would want this for me." She stood up, and Luke was just staring at her, his expression raw and open. "Did you mean it?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. "What you said about loving me?" "I do not say things I do not mean, Luke. Not anymore. It has only been 3 weeks. I have known the man you are since you walked into that courthouse to marry a stranger for a friend. I knew you when you fixed my fences without being asked, and when you pulled me through a window with your bare hands. I do not need years, Luke. I need truth, and you have given me more in 3 weeks than most men do in a lifetime. He looked nervous for the first time she had ever seen, fumbling with his hat. "I do not know how to do this, Margaret. How to be a husband. I can track, I can fight, but I do not know how to be yours." She took his bandaged hand between both of hers. "You learn. Same way I learned to run this ranch. You just do it. When you get it wrong, you try again." "But what if I hurt you?" he whispered. "You will not. You cannot know that." "I do know," she said, her voice firm, "because men who hurt people do not stand around worrying about it first. The fact you're even asking tells me everything." He closed his eyes and she watched him let go of a weight he had carried forever. "Okay," he said, his voice clearer. "I will learn." He opened his eyes. "But Margaret, I need to say something true. I love you. Not because of Daniel's promise or the law. I love you because when I am with you, the ghosts in my head go quiet. I have been looking for that quiet my whole life." She moved in and kissed him. It was not a kiss of fire, but one of choice. It was a promise that here on this land, they were starting something real. He held her like she was the last solid thing in a shifting world. For 34 years, it felt like the world had tried to knock her down. But holding Luke, she finally had her answer. The answer to a question she'd been asking herself since she buried her husband, and stared into an empty future. Just 3 months later, their new house was finished, bigger than the one they lost. It had 2 bedrooms now, a secret Margaret was keeping from Luke, though he likely already knew, what with her being sick every morning and the way the doctor had smiled and called her Mrs. Callahan. This time she didn't correct him. She just went home to the new porch, the one Luke built with a dozen neighbors who came to help right a wrong. She looked out at the land that was hers, truly hers, with her name right there on the deed. That old law was gone, repealed by the legislature after her testimony in Cheyenne. She'd stood before 14 lawmakers and a whole room of women from every corner of Wyoming and spoken her truth. Luke had told her she looked beautiful that day. She said he looked like a cornered animal. He admitted he was, but not because of the politicians. It was all those women in the gallery, looking at him like he was some kind of saint. He told her, "I am not a hero." She'd listed it all out, from saving her land to facing down Gunman. "What do you call that?" she'd asked. "Just doing what needed doing," he had replied with a real smile, the kind that finally lit up his eyes. Last week, a letter came from the governor. It was not a medal, just a simple paper saying the territory of Wyoming saw Luke Mercer as a man of honor. He read it, folded it, and tucked it away with his brother Daniel's letters. When Margaret asked if he was keeping them, he said, "I keep the things that matter." She sat on that porch as the sun went down, listening to him inside. He was hanging a shelf she'd asked about, but she knew what he was really building out in the barn. She had seen the cradle he was making just yesterday. It was pine wood, sanded smooth, with little horses carved right into it. She'd watched him work, her hand on her belly, thinking about how Daniel had sent this man to her. A man building a cradle for a child he wasn't even supposed to know about yet. But Luke saw everything. He knew she had stopped drinking coffee, and he saw where her hand went when she was lost in thought. He was just waiting for her to say the words. "Luke," she called out. He came to the doorway with sawdust in his hair. "Come sit with me." He put his hammer down and sat right beside her, their shoulders touching. Margaret took his hand, tracing the old scars. "I have to tell you something." "I know," he said softly. She looked at him, surprised. "Luke, I have tracked men across 3 territories. You think I can't tell when my own wife starts crying at sunsets?" "That was just allergies," she said. But her laugh was shaky and wet. He pulled her close. "Are you scared?" she asked. "Terrified," he whispered back. "Good, me too. I do not know a thing about babies." "You did not know anything about being a husband either," she said. "You are doing just fine." He was quiet for a long moment. Daniel would have been a good father. Her heart ached with a sweet kind of sadness. hearing this good, scarred man honor the memory of the husband who came before. He would have been, she agreed. And so will you. How can you be so sure? He asked. Because a good daddy is just a good man who stays put. And you, Luke Mercer, you have always, always stayed. He pressed his lips to her hair. I will build a bigger porch, he said after a while. Why is that? Because I reckon a child is going to need some room to run. She smiled and leaned against him, feeling his steady heartbeat. He was a man who had walked through hell and found he could build a life instead of just taking one. He was a man capable of love. Margaret Callahan, a widow who became a fighter, a wife, and now a mother, sat on the porch of a home built from ashes and sheer will. The prairie around them was no longer empty. It was full. It was full of the sound of a hammer inside their house. It was full of cattle lowing in the pasture and the sound of wind in the tall grass. It was full of the quiet sound of her husband breathing beside her. And it was full of a tiny heartbeat under her own. This was a future she had fought for, bled for, and chosen for herself. In a place where some men saw women as property, Margaret Callahan kept her name, kept her land, and loved the man they all told her to fear. And Luke Mercer, a man known only for his past, chose to be a husband and a father. He chose to build things instead of breaking them. The world saw an outlaw, but she saw the man who stayed.